So my pitch was, at the time, let's treat this with some sense of reality, more like not so much a comic book movie as an action film. Really the idea of an extraordinary character in an ordinary world, rather than, what Tim had done was this very extraordinary world where Batman sort of made sense. We wanted to have kind of the Dick Donner treatment, where it's like you've got a relatively ordinary, recognizable reality and then this extraordinary figure. Try not to separate my love for very sophisticated, esoteric filmmakers, people I grew up watching, like Nicholas Roeg, whose films I love. I try not to separate that side of myself from the side that grew up watching Star Wars and James Bond and loving that. You try to pitch the film in the language that you think it should be made in. You try and think of what's the breadth of the audience you're making the film for. But I don't think that needs to involve dumbing it down or selling it out in any way, because I grew up loving Hollywood blockbusters, and for me it's really a process of trying to recreate that magic, that sense of scale, that sense of immersion in a world that you grew up with. If you can bring that to filmmaking, I think you have the potential to reach a wider audience. In expanding the story, we had almost a little bit of a genre shift. We went to a sort of a big crime story, a grand city story that involves, the law enforcement, the criminal community, the judicial system, people working outside the law, all of these things coming together. The opportunity you get with working in a particular genre, like the action movie genre, the superhero genre, working within a genre, it affords you the opportunity to explore things you're interested in or afraid of, neurosis you have, worries you have about the way the world is. It allows you to explore them in a very sort of exaggerated manner, in a way that you can really tap into the collective fears that we have as a society. And particularly in the case of Batman, you have the opportunity through his environment, through Gotham, to really offer a very dark reflection of the society we live in. And for us, one of, I think, society's most palpable fears is the fear of the collapse to anarchy, the idea of people in society who will not in any way be bound by any kind of convention, whether that of society or even the convention of criminal society within the larger society. But I think that there's an overriding sense in which Batman and who Batman is and how people respond to him that is actually the sort of defining feature of the story. And I think by the end that becomes clear that it's very much Batman's story, as the title would suggest. We were trying to figure out, how do you move on from what you've done in Batman Begins? How do you make the film bigger and more than Batman Begins without compromising the story and the characters and everything? And I wanted to push further and further in the direction of shooting on location and shooting with a real-world scale. Because even with some of the interiors, the office spaces or boardrooms and things like that, the biggest set you could possibly build isn't going to be as big as the real-world version of it. And so shooting on real locations, you're able to get some of that scope and scale very naturally and organically into the film. And it felt to me that Gotham had to become this huge arena in the movie for these characters to face off in. I started off on this journey that I've continued of always trying to think in 3 dimensions, not look at the shot as a 2-dimensional picture, but look at where everything is in 3-dimensional space. That's why I don't use a monitor on set to this day. I just stay by the camera because I want to see where things are in 3-dimensional space, and then place the camera according to my idea of what the point of view is. And I like to try and align the audience quite closely with the point of view of a character in the film. That feels the most natural form of storytelling to me. And the idea of a narrative that's a maze or a labyrinth, and the idea that rather than being above that maze and watching the characters make mistakes and wrong turns, you would enter into the maze kind of looking over their shoulder and make the wrong turns with them and find the blind alleys with them. And that's really an approach that in different forms, I've carried on using through all my films. Oh, well, I've worked with Wally for many films now. Since Memento, we've worked together. We have a very strong relationship. So really what you're looking for is somebody who listens, but has their own ideas and can execute. And so somebody who can work with autonomy and authority. If you have to step off set, they can keep moving the things forward, but who will listen to you and who will try their best to interpret what it is you want. But it's a very, very vital relationship. The relationship between the director and the DP is very important in production, particularly in terms of figuring out how to actually affect these things that I have in mind for the film. Particularly in this film, I'd wanted to shoot in the IMAX format, to shoot our key action sequences that way, and that's something no one's ever done before, no DP has ever done before. So I think with every film I've tried to set Wally a big challenge, and the IMAX, for Wally particularly, it shifted the way he had to light things at night, for example. So the scenes we just looked at where the Joker's standing in the middle of the street, the truck flip and everything. He couldn't backlight those scenes because normally what he would have done is put the light just on top of the frame and put a backlight. That's a very elegant and practical way of lighting night scenes. So he had to come up with something completely different. He had to front light the buildings because the IMAX frame is so tall, there's no way to get the lights in from behind. As filmmakers, we got used to the technology, but as audience members, you get used to watching it through the course of the film. And so with the opening, we were very careful to shoot it in a very precise, slightly calmer than usual manner, and let the shots play a little longer and let you find things in the massive frame. But as the film progresses, we get sort of more and more frenetic, really, and I don't think people notice. They seem to sort of, go with it. And for me, it's an experience that takes me back to when I was a kid going to the movies, and the scope and scale and grandeur that great cinema can have. As a filmmaker, I think you're always trying to get back to that. And for me, in expanding the scope of the story we told in Batman Begins, and expanding the canvas and having the greatest possible canvas for the Batman to face off against the Joker, IMAX seemed the best way to do that. One of the things I love about directing is you don't specialize. You have to be able to really think of all the different aspects of the film at the same time. It's also important to surround yourself with collaborators who can take the pressure off certain aspects of it, and casting's a huge part of that. Finding actors. Some of the great actors I've worked with on the Dark Knight trilogy, for example, who, they would recognize that, yes, we're also having to worry about flipping this truck or blowing this building up, whatever. And so their process would be balanced against that, and working with very generous performers was a big part of that. And we found ways to try and create a little space for the actors there, that we could pay a little more attention to the drama, not lose that in the fireworks and in the grand scale things. And so one of the things I very much have enjoyed about working at this scale is there is an alternation, there's a shift between large scale action, car chases, flipping trucks, that kind of thing, and then you get to spend a week, just with actors exploring the characters and sitting there talking, and that shift is that variety is a really fun thing.
Chris Nolan, I think, really insisted and wanted all of us to play everything for truth, which is not always the case in a huge movie. Sometimes nobody cares about that. But in this case, he carved out the room for us.
I wanted to signal with the casting that we were very serious about this, and that this film really mattered to us. When you're working with actors at that level, it's not really a question of auditioning, it's a question of me as a director knowing the actors, knowing their work, and figuring out who's going to work in this role. When you're working in such a public arena, when you're working on a beloved character and you're trying to put your own spin on it, and when we were doing the Dark Knight trilogy, there was a real expectation that we do something that we thought was great, that we don't try to serve an existing interpretation of the character, that we come up with something new and something different. And the only way to do that is to insulate yourself from the chatter. I always felt the only way that I could feel free as a creative force was to ignore that stuff altogether. There's a very direct relationship between the physicality of the character, the iconography of the character, and the the emotional state of the character, and I think that's one of the reasons I've enjoyed doing these films. You get to create something on a very operatic scale. The audience has associations with the character coming into the movie. They know who this character is and what he represents.
The thing that intrigued me in first making this movie was that whilst I had loved the kind of more spoof Batman, and Adam West did that spectacularly, and he was brilliant at that, to learn that Bob Kane, when he first made and created Batman. You know, it was he was a very dark character at that time. So we're actually not coming up with something entirely new. We're going back to his birthplace, and he was born from a very dark place. And we always said, you know, that the character of Batman should always be as fascinating as any of the villains.
I don't have a job on set. I think I see it as a lens that people's input gets sort of focused through. My role is to listen and to tell people what to do as well, but also to listen and you know, try and figure out what is going to serve the story and the particular telling of the story that we're doing, and what isn't and needs to be, you know, ignored or jettisoned or whatever. And so you really want to have the best people around you with the most ideas, and you want to have people who are okay to, you want people to feel that they can contribute and say anything, but you also want people whose feelings won't be hurt when you say that's not right, you know, so that you can have a very free environment creatively. I recommend it to any young filmmaker starting out, is just try everything. You don't feel quite so at the mercy of your crew. And there's an interesting relationship as a director between yourself and the people who work for you on set. They're looking to you for leadership and guidance. They also want to feel like you care about their job. And I think one of the ways of showing somebody that you care about their job, you know, is to know about it and be able to engage in a conversation with the sound department about microphones and which microphones they're using and things like that.